guests, dear listeners, welcome to this webinar on supporting the development of ESCO markets in Africa, with the focus on the role of aggregation and standardization. So thank you for joining. So why do we want to have this specific focus today? Well, basically, some of you might have been there, some of you might have missed it this year, but we had an international ESCO symposium in May this year in Paris, where we had the opportunity to meet ESCO practitioners from around the world, and we focused mainly on two topics: regulation and finance, and barriers and enabling environments within these topics. And some recurrent themes came in both these topics. So the need for standardization to create trust in ESCO markets, the need for standardization for scale, so larger ticket sizes and scale of ESCO projects, and reduction of transaction costs, and standardization for finance and financing product for ESCOs. And we saw this as something that we would want to dive deeper into, and how this could be integrated into existing processes at national level, processes and policies, including how ESCOs could be presented as implementation instrument or implementation framework to achieve national climate targets as expressed in the nationally determined contributions. But we also wanted for this webinar to have a specific focus on the African continent, because while ESCO markets are developing or thriving in other regions like China, the US, and the EU, and also to a certain extent in Latin America, they still struggle in the African continent. So we see that aggregation and standardization can have a big role to play in this context. And we see also Super ESCOs as being instrumental to achieve this. But beyond that, also international development partners, and in this case, we're very lucky to have here on board the African Development Bank, because they have a variety of activities in the continent that support aggregation and standardization and harmonization. So we have here with us today Kevo Tossou, which is a principal energy efficiency and investment officer working for the bank, and they have some programs with the Sustainable Energy Fund for Africa, an initiative called the Africa Super ESCO Acceleration Program, where he is involved in assisting countries to address ESCO uptake barriers through the establishment of Super ESCO frameworks. And beyond today's topic, I just also want to remind you that we have our policy recommendations, where there are also elements of aggregation and standardization and harmonization. You can also go to our website and read more about these topics. I also mentioned the symposium, so the International ESCO Symposium that we had this May. Good news, we plan to replicate the success again and have a symposium next year as well. So stay tuned for the future announcements on our website and through email correspondence when we have the final dates and location. We can say we know them in theory or in principle already. So I'm quite excited for both the location and the potential topics that we will discuss at the upcoming International ESCO Symposium. But for now, we'll get back to the topic of the day. So we have with us Kevo Tossou, which works for the African Development Bank as the Principal Energy Efficiency Specialist and Investment Officer within the Energy Efficiency Division, where he here helps the bank member countries promote large-scale energy efficiency investments to mitigate climate change impacts, to address their energy sector challenges and achieve their green growth vision. has more than 15 years of professional experience within energy efficiency and ESCO market development. He's been working with countries for the promotion of Super ESCO business models, project and program design, and implementation and evaluation. And I actually had the pleasure of, even though we had scheduled this webinar for a while now, I actually had the pleasure to meet Luke personally in Nairobi last week, where we also participated in a common activity to assist Kenya in creating enabling environments for ESCO market development, including the operationalization of the national utility run Super ESCO. So enough from me. I think we're quite eager to hear from you, Luke. I am informed that your camera is not working, but we have you at least in sound, and we will have your slides presented. Thank you very much for joining in and for your willingness to contribute to the discussion. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you again for that, for, let's say, inviting us to take part in the debate, and especially focusing on the on the ESCO market in African countries. And to start my development, I would like just to highlight, to sort of give you some background on the context in which the African Development Bank is deploying a lot of efforts to support the development of the ESCO market in its regional member countries. So allow me to highlight four points here. The first one is that according to the International Energy Agency, Africa's annual growth rate, annual electricity demand is projected to grow during 2020 and during 2030, between 2020 and 2030, by approximately 5.7% in the context of the Sustainable Africa scenario. And you will agree with me if I say that there is let's say, there is a recognition that energy efficiency has become one of the most critical policy tools to help meet the substantial growth in electricity demand. The second point I would like to highlight is that African countries are increasingly referencing energy efficiency in their policy frameworks and also NDCs, as you mentioned earlier, Federico. And these plans support harmonized regulations and standards, as well as increased private sector participation in the design, implementation, and financing of energy efficiency investment projects across key energy consuming sectors. And as you know, public sector energy use is generally a major cost for the government and compete for resources with other critical economic and social development program. So though energy ESCOs have been instrumental in accelerating energy efficiency investment in the public and private sectors in developed economies, such as China, the US, the EU, as was mentioned earlier, in Africa, the ESCO market is still nascent. And considering the relatively nascent nature of the energy efficiency market in Africa, government should lead by example by investing in energy efficiency retrofit programs in public facilities, meaning schools, hospitals, offices, street lighting, etc. However, the traditional challenges for energy efficiency investment are that they are relatively small and diverse, as we heard earlier. And at the bank, we believe that publicly backed Super ESCO could be a way to drive the creation of a sustainable energy efficiency market in Africa, as the Super ESCO has the potential to help the fragmentation of the energy efficiency investment by bundling the small and diverse energy efficiency investment, which one bundle represents, let's say, an attractive business opportunities that can help incentivize existing energy efficiency service suppliers to enter the energy efficiency markets. And also, as you know, what also makes public sector interesting is that the energy efficiency investment project in the public sector facilities offer a great potential for project replicability, as they are of a similar type. Example, I can mention office buildings, schools. These facilities, for example, tend to have a relatively similar end-use consumption patterns. And while investing in energy efficiency, Super ESCOs can support the development of an ESCO ecosystem, for example, by possibly hosting an ESCO accreditation schemes or certification scheme, building capacity of ESCOs and other EE market players, and standardizing energy performance contracts. So just want to quickly give a brief description of how the model or the concept work for those that are not familiar with the Super ESCO concept. I just want to mention quickly that Super ESCOs basically sign ESCO contract with public sector institutions, public institutions, promising to reduce the annual energy costs, including the ESCO service fees, below the present energy costs. Then, using either internal funds or financing from commercial banks and other investors, the Super ESCO contracts private ESCOs using the energy performance contracting approach to implement the required energy efficiency project and perform annual energy management at the beneficiary institutions during the duration of the ESCO contract. So I would like to mention here, I think it is important to note that under the energy performance contracting approach, the payment to the ESCO are contingent upon achieving certain pre-specified energy saving performance levels. And the other thing that I want to point out here is that the Super ESCO structure is really flexible. The Super ESCO can finance individual energy efficiency investment on its own. The Super ESCO can co-finance a single large energy efficiency project with a local bank, getting the loan on the strength of its balance sheet. The Super ESCO can also set up an SPV, a project subsidiary to package a number of investments under one ESCO contract into a large investment program with the objective to finance the project on a project finance basis. So, as examples, in that case, will include investment programs for energy efficiency, for energy efficient street lighting in a number of municipalities. It could be energy efficiency investment programs in a number of hospitals that the Super ESCO bundled together to have a project that has an interesting size in terms of investment volume. Or it could be a public rooftop solar PV investment program. So these are examples of energy efficiency investment program that the Super ESCO could bundle and form a larger energy efficiency investment program that it can even put under one ESCO contract. And the other thing I want to quickly mention here is that Super ESCOs can be both public and the private sector led, and target both public and private sectors ESCO project pipelines. So if I'm like focusing for when I say public based super ESCO, these public super ESCO will ideally target public buildings and public buildings and infrastructures or facilities and infrastructures in the public sectors. Now, regarding private sector based super ESCOs, they can also play a leading role in developing and implementing projects in the private sector and acting as a financier for ESCOs, for ESCOs, while also acting, why not, as the ESCOs themselves sometimes, given the credibility and the financial capacity. Now, I would like to sort of just mention some example of the use of the super ESCO concept in Africa here, and but I think it's important to note that super ESCOs in the EE space are still quite non-existent in the on the African continent, except the case that is recent more in South Africa, where the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure developed the integrated renewable energy and resource efficiency program, which aims at rolling out energy efficiency, water efficiency, alternative waste management, and embedded solar PV and other renewable energy option at public, government facilities in the government building portfolio. The portfolio which consists of approximately 92,000 facility. And this program will be the largest program for the procurement, of renewable energy and resource efficiency for public facility. I think they're aiming at investing between 7 and 15 billion US dollars to the period leading to 2050. Now, in terms of private sector, I heard recently that a bank in Morocco, I think it's Ati Jariwafa Bank, that launched the Africa Energy Efficiency Fund last month. And if my understanding is correct, this fund will operate as a super ESCO, targeting, for the private sector in countries, covering countries like Morocco and other countries in Africa. So that's the example of private super ESCO that I can, it has just started. Other private sector-led super ESCO that comes to my mind is the Canadian SOFIAC in Quebec, and also Climagy in Philippines. And just want to, I think it's also important to note that, these private super ESCO, they also have the ESCO project. They don't compete against project, but instead they, let's say, implement the project, ESCO project that they have identified themselves. And for example, in Canada, in Canada, with Sophia, Sophia can sort of organize bidding for the project based on a list of qualified bidders that they have for the ESCO project. So, but as you can see, the example in South Africa, they also, using the bundling approach for the facilities. I know they launched the request for proposal at the beginning of this year to recruit the ESCOs that will implement the different projects. I know they're starting with prisons, and that this will be extended to other government-owned facilities. But that's the request for expression. The request for proposal have been launched, but haven't got any, let's say, recent updates on where they are in terms of announcing they prefer the bidders that will implement the project, the ESCO project. So now the implementation at the bank level, the implementation of the Super ESCO approach is one of the strategic priorities identified by the bank's Sustainable Energy Fund for Africa to unlock public and private sector investments in energy efficiency. So the bank, in its approach to provide TA for countries in establishing and operationalizing the Super ESCO, the bank uses safer grant resources up to $1 million to support the countries in establishing and operationalizing the Super ESCO. And the approach has two broad areas of focus and takes into account the existing sector, private sector ESCOs and the other energy efficiency market players as well. The first focus area is on the creation of an enabling environment with the objective of putting in place standard procedures and documents for a successful operationalization for the Super ESCO. And the second focus area that I would like to hear mention is the development of a pipeline of energy efficiency project to support the Super ESCO in the realization of its first set of energy efficiency investment projects. So to be more specific regarding these, the focus area, when we look at the first focus area, the TA grant, overall, let's say the TA grant is used to mobilize an international firm that provides TA support to the established Super ESCO entity in the design, let's say, of its overall business plan and formulation of a roadmap, and support also in the establishment of models of energy performance contracts that are really adapted to the typology of a project, energy efficiency project, likely to be implemented both in the field of public buildings, local, municipalities or industries. And the model contract, the idea of the model contract is, let's say, justified by the need to avoid starting from scratch every time another entity, like another public entity or corporate entity, embarks on energy performance contracting. And what it therefore, it is a source of considerable resource saving. Another important element of the approach under the first focus area that I would like to mention is also the support for the mobilization of external financial resources. So the TA that is recruited, the TA firm recruiters provide support to the established Super ESCO in the mobilization of external financial resources, in particular from private banks, or let's say international lenders, or even mobilization of resource mobilization from climate fund, international climate fund. It could be JEF, it could be the Green Climate Fund, and other donors such as bilateral or multilateral development banks. And under the second focus area on the development of pipeline of energy efficiency investment project, the approach includes energy audit of selected sites to form the pipeline of energy efficiency project, and also supports the project implementation among the list of among the energy efficiency, the pipeline project, support the implementation of a couple of them from identification to operation, provide support. And that is part of the hands-on capacity building strategy that has been included in this TA support for the establishment of operationalization of the Super ESCO. So I think the main point I need to make here is that the bank has designed or adopted an approach that really takes into account the different moving parts, the different moving pieces that you need to put together to have a conducive environment for the successful operationalization of the Super ESCO. The Super ESCO itself as an entity, and also a conducive environment for the ESCO market players, because one of the mandates that the Super ESCO is having under this TA is also not only to invest in the energy efficiency project, but also to support the development of the ESCO market by building capacity of the ESCOs, also the other market players. And I think the main important things here is that this Super ESCO program, once when the Super ESCO becomes fully operational, they sort of connect local private ESCOs to ESCO project in the public sector. And by doing that, they are sort of building, reinforcing the references, the project references for these Super ESCOs, and sort of enhancing the experience, and which will allow these local, the private ESCOs operating the market, building on the experience that they have sort of gained in the public sector. It will allow them to reach out to the end-use consumers in the private sector to sort of market the ESCO services. So I think it's a very important point that we need to highlight here when we're talking about the Super ESCO initiative in the African context. So just quickly describe these two TA, Super ESCO technical assistance initiative that are currently ongoing on the continent. The bank has provided up to $1 million USD to Société d'Ingénierie Énergétique, which is based in Morocco, which is a state, a public entity designated by the Kingdom of Morocco to operate as a Super ESCO. So, and the TA support, which is extended to 2025, aims at transforming SEA into a fully fledged Super ESCO. And the Super ESCO SEA will be targeting public building, street lighting, sustainable mobility, industries, and support to SMEs and private ESCOs. The second example that I also need to mention, which is also ongoing, is the utility-run Super ESCO, Super ESCO initiative in Kenya, in Nairobi, and with the KPLC being the utility company. So the objective of the TA is to structure and build the capacity of a dedicated team within KPLC to operate as a utility-based Super ESCO. And that Super ESCO, KPLC Super ESCO, will be targeting primarily public buildings and infrastructures, including office buildings, hospitals, schools, street lighting, commercial, and even, why not, industrial sector, and also provide support to private ESCOs. So these are the two, let's say, TA, concrete TA that are currently ongoing. In Morocco, the international firm has been already recruited and is already has already started working with SEA. Whereas in Kenya, the recruitment process is still ongoing, and is about to be completed. I mean, building on this, building on the experience that the bank is gaining from this TA initiative, and also taking into account the growing interest that many other regional member countries have expressed in terms of developing the Super ESCO concepts in their countries to facilitate or boost investment in energy efficiency. The bank approved last year in 2023 a multi-country program, which is called the Africa Super ESCO Acceleration Program, approved last year, which with an overall dedicated envelope of $5 million USD to be implemented over 3 years. And the Super ESCO Acceleration Program, it's a TA program, and with the overarching objective of catalyzing private sector investment in energy efficiency. So the first phase is ongoing now, and will target up to three countries. Senegal is, let's say, the first country participating in the program. There will be 2 other countries that will be added to the program because, as I mentioned, the ASAP is supporting up to 3 countries. And yes, many other, I mean, other countries, I will not say many, but other countries are also considering considering to establish and operationalize a Super ESCO for the economies. And these countries have, for example, already conducted an assessment or looked at the feasibility of establishing and operationalizing a Super ESCO in their jurisdiction. So you have the examples of Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, Burkina Faso, and Rwanda. I know Uganda is considering the same and will launch its assessment for its feasibility study for the establishment in the coming weeks, if not months. The ASAP has 2 specific objectives. The first one is related to the establishment and operationalization of Super ESCOs, as I mentioned, in up to 3 countries. And the second objective, specific objective, is related to the development of harmonized regional certification schemes for ESCOs and individual professionals. When I say individual professionals, energy efficiency individual professional, I mean energy auditors, energy measurement and verification professionals, could be energy managers, etc. And the first ASAP has two pillars. The first one is the establishment and operationalization of Super ESCO, as I mentioned, targeting up to 3 countries, and we are using the same approach in terms of implementation, supporting the countries. We're using the same approach as I described earlier, so I will not come back on that. But I think the main thing to mention here is that, I mean, though I'm making the point that the approach is sort of standard, we also adjusting this approach, taking into account the realities of the countries, that the beneficiary country, and also taking into account the specific technical assistance need to have the Super ESCO operational in the country. So the second pillar of the ASAP is the development of harmonized regional certification schemes for ESCOs and individual energy efficiency professionals. And the approach that we have adopted consists of 3 important points. The first one being the development of a framework and process for harmonized regional certification scheme for ESCOs, and whereby we are looking at the evaluation of existing national frameworks, and also looking at the existing international best practices for the training and the certification of ESCOs and individual energy efficiency professionals. And under the first point, we're also looking at the development. The program is also looking at the development of job references, competency references, framework training, certification references, also based on international and regional best practices. And yeah, and another point that is important to mention here under the first activity is also the development of a process, the process which is required for the regional certification to run smoothly in a sustainable way. The second point of the approach is related to the development of tools for the operationalization of the scheme. And these include, for example, tools for capacity building and implementation of the certification schemes, and also organizing training of trainers who will be, let's say, the first to be involved in the certification of individual professionals and so on. So the program is also looking at the whole infrastructure that is required for a regional scheme to run smoothly. The third point, another point in our approach is related to the communication and awareness raising, where the program is looking at the development of a strategy and the communication plan for the certification of, for the certification scheme, for the promotion of the certification scheme. And for that the regional certification, the program is working jointly with regional centers for renewable energy and energy efficiency. So in conclusion, I would like to just say that the process of establishing and operationalizing Super ESCOs, it is lengthy, if not complex. However, the investment in the energy efficiency investment that will be implemented by the Super ESCOs, once they are fully operational, will lead to more, not less, but more fiscal space that will allow government to expand social services and meet critical infrastructure investment priorities, local jobs to green existing infrastructure while upgrading facilities. And there are also many other benefits, such as reduction in loads demand on already stretched utilities and dependence on imported fuel and environmental impact from energy efficiency. And I think the main takeaway here is that our approach is the bank's approach to develop the energy to the ESCO market is a sort of holistic approach. We are really, as I mentioned, really looking at making sure that we take into account all the pieces, all the parts, the moving parts that need to be together for such a market to develop. So that lets me stop here, and that's what I wanted to present to you. Thank you very much, and I will be very happy to take questions that you may have. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thank you, Federico. Over to you.
Well, no, I would say thank you, Luc. First of all, thank you for your very interesting presentation, valid points, and also introduction to the activities that the bank is implementing in the continent. We actually got some few questions, and they're all for you. So I will read them to you, and hopefully we can also maybe have a discussion around some of the topics covered here. There's still time to pose some more questions. If you want, you can post them in the chat, and we'll try to address as much as possible with the time given. But before, since I'm moderating, I take the liberty to actually just mention that standardization and aggregation, again, are important. We haven't really started the standardizing contracts at the Global ESCO network, but I know that some of our users have found our contract library on our website quite useful. So in case you're not aware, we have a specific section under our library that provides a list of publicly available ESCO model contracts applied in different jurisdictions, so different countries. We know that some have used it as inspiration to develop or review their existing contracts. I also want to mention that some of our advisory committee members, they are currently working on publication on Super ESCOs as well. So stay tuned for that. I think there is more to come on aggregation and harmonization. So now over to the questions. I can see here that there is a question related to the Super ESCO. And it says that SIE and Attijari Wafa Bank achieve a synergy. What about markets where finance is not provided? Can the Super ESCO operate alone? Or how can the bank, I assume it's the African Development Bank, support this missing piece if it's not there? So I assume this is basically looking at the Super ESCO as an aggregator, but not necessarily providing the private ESCOs with a financing vehicle. So maybe you have some comments to that, Luke.
Yes, thank you for that question. And I mean, it's in my comments will be that if you take the Super ESCO as an aggregator, the bank does have instruments that, let's say, accommodate the needs of the Super ESCO as an aggregator. And what I mean by this is the bank is not only, has products, instruments to support public sector projects, public sector investment. It also, under its sovereign operation window, it also has a lot of instruments for private sector operation under its non-sovereign operation window. And for a private sector operation project, let's say in the private sector, the bank let's say looks at investment size of around 10 million US dollars. But then when I say 10 million US dollars, you all agree with me, and we just mentioned it earlier, that energy efficiency projects are, let's say, fragmented. They have, fragmented in nature, so which means they are very small in terms of investment size. So what the bank does to sort of reach out to this project and make sure and ensure that the bank supports this energy efficiency project is that the bank, it's possible to use financial intermediaries, also in investment funds, equity fund, debt fund, and so on. So one example that I can give you, there is a fund in which the bank has invested to support energy efficiency projects or programs, which is the leveraging energy access framework, through which the bank is providing a guarantee instruments, guarantee to to commercial institutions, local commercial banks, so that they can provide loans in local currency to aggregators like Super ESCOs when they have a project in, ESCO project. So it's something we have that fund. There is another fund which is called the Africa Go Green Fund, in which the bank has also invested along with other investors. Where Africa Go Green Fund focusing mainly on clean energy project renewable and energy efficiency. So my main point here is that though you have projects, projects. I'm talking about in a project in the amount of 10 million. Even if the project is small, there are also instruments to support this sort of project. So the bank has, is supporting. It's also part of the strategy of the bank to support the development of cleaner, green growth in its regional member countries. So you have these instruments that really accommodate bigger and smaller energy efficiency investment, energy efficiency project. And we, the bank is also, let's say, working with local financial institutions on, for example, dedicated line of credit line of credit dedicated to energy efficiency and renewable energy projects. So that's another example of support that the bank is providing that can provide to ESCOs as aggregators, and also even local, private ESCOs. So to accommodate all the market, these market players, the ESCOs and the Super ESCO. But the resources can go to the ESCOs, that can go directly to the end user who want to implement the energy efficiency project by themselves. You have both cases that are possible. So let me stop there. If maybe there is any follow-up question on that, I will be happy to respond.
Well, thank you very much, Luc. And it's good to know and also to communicate to our audience that actually the financing support vehicles are there already, but basically the Super ESCO contributes with the aggregation and maybe also systematization and creation of the national ESCO markets. So good to know that there are financing opportunities already available. And I think probably some of us will go and look up some of these programs. I was at least aware of the African Go Green, but also I'm learning from this exchange. So thank you. I have another question, not related to the first one, and I think it relates to your slide on the Super ESCO diagram and the approach in South Africa. What would the exit plan for such an SPV be, so the special purpose vehicle be? So any thoughts about the exit plan for these structures?
Sorry, I'm trying to get back to go to that slide. I hope you see it.
Not now. No. Yes, now it's moving.
Okay.
Yes, I think this is the one.
Yeah, I mean, the exit plan for this SPV, the government, what the government has done also is to be able to invest in this energy and to roll out the program. The government has established a financing funding instrument, which is the integrated renewable energy and resource efficiency funds. And that fund, which I think is already, has already gained support from some investors. So that fund will be, there will be a fund manager, and the fund manager is using that fund to invest in these energy efficiency project. So once the ESCOs are recruited on a certain duration of their contract. So these ESCOs, once the contract is finished, there will be the project are implemented based on energy performance the energy performance contracting approach. So and some of the contracts for some of the projects, the fund is providing resources, loans, debt instrument, equity instrument, and sometimes even technical assistance for conducting the investment grade audit. So once the project is, let's say, it starts running, once the project is implemented and then start running, it is done over a certain duration of time. So at the end of the project, it means that the contract is finished, and the SPV, the ESCO, the ESCO has got all its payments related to the energy efficiency investment project. And this, what I'm talking about, we are not talking about just one round. So it's something which has, I think, 3 or 4 rounds. And once I mean, if all these are covered, I mean, the idea is that the Super ESCO can sort of, let's say, why not extend to private sector end users to sort of guarantee, ensure the sustainability of the model. So this is one of the possibilities that I mean I have. Based on my understanding, I'm sure there may be. Maybe there are some other latest developments on that, maybe some changes, but this is what I will say for now.
Well, thank you, and I think it's quite reasonable. So an SPV comes to mind on in France for the Paris municipality, where they created an SPV for the retrofit of schools, and once then that program is done, I guess the contracted ESCOs would have achieved their, as you mentioned, basically their expected revenues, and then the savings would have been achieved, that the SPV would either be discontinued or potentially enter into new opportunities. And we have received a lot of more questions in the meantime, and some of them relate to the ASAP program, and others relate to trainings and certification. So I think I'll try to bundle them. So aggregation also in the Q&A, and maybe take your program first. Yes. So there are several questions. So about how long the program will last, if you're going to expand it to new countries, how to potentially engage, if there are opportunities. So maybe you can expand a little bit on I mean, you mentioned 3 countries, but are there further plans for the program?
Yeah, and as I mentioned, for this first phase, which is expected to run for 3 years, so by the end of 2026, if I'm not mistaken, yeah, 2025. So that's the first phase. And there will be a second phase whereby we can sort of extend to other countries based on, I mean, we're not just picking countries, that's we're also basing on a certain readiness criteria. So that's also a very important point to mention. As I said, the program is a demand-driven program, which means that we want to ensure some level of ownership from the countries that approach the program and request for technical assistance to establish and operationalize the Super ESCO. So the answer to the question is yes, it will be extended in the second phase, and there will be the second phase. And for that second phase, based on, I mean, the results of the first phase, I mean, we will see, I mean, how many countries will be included in the second phase. It could be less than 3, or it could be more than 3 compared to the first phase. So it will depend on the results, and then yeah. But the other things that is also important for me to mention here is that I mean, you have in this case on the continent, you have countries that will, for example, or entities, government entities, other entities that will approach the program for technical assistance. But then, I mean, you will see that the environment or the conditions are not ready yet. I mean, for the operationalization of a Super ESCO, we're also looking at the potential, the energy efficiency investment potential in that country. We really want to focus on countries where we have really a large potential, and we also want to focus on countries where we are sure that once the Super ESCO is there, the country will really move to the next step by sort of investing in a pipeline of energy efficiency project that will have been developed under the technical assistance. So the idea is not to provide technical assistance, spend a lot of money, effort, do that, but then at the end, the pipeline is there, then everything is put in a drawer and nothing happens. So we're also mindful of that, really being careful to avoid that sort of situation.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are some questions with specific reference to countries, amongst other Cape Verde Islands, asking they are developing a regulatory framework, but are yet to establish a financial plan to support ESCO activities, and how, I guess, is probably related to how you could help. I would say from the global ESCO network perspective, we provide knowledge and information. And I think Luke provided some reference to funds that you can already access for energy efficiency investments. So that's, I think, a good reference. And also there's a mention to Côte d'Ivoire that are implementing a Super ESCO, and mentioning that they are in a little bit of a standstill, and maybe something on the way forward, how the bank supports them moving ahead. And they're slightly separated, but there is a commonality between these questions. So how can potentially you engage with countries that are not necessarily part of the program? And in the program, the issue that you just mentioned, that things might come at a standstill, how can countries then be helped in moving forward?
Yeah, most of the time it comes to a standstill because government is not making the decision, because let's come back, for example, to the Super ESCO, the TA that the bank is providing. I mean, for that TA to be able to be deployed, the government or the country needed to say, this is the entity that I want to transform into a Super ESCO. This is the entity that I'm designating to play the role of a Super ESCO. But that decision, most of the time, like when you do the first assessment studies, you look at the potential, you look at the institutional environment, and then you look at the feasibility of establishing and operationalizing a Super ESCO. When we're looking at that, when we're looking at the feasibility, we also, let's say, scan the whole institutional arrangement, identify possible entities that can play the role of the Super ESCO. Now, once all these possible entities have been analyzed, you look at the weaknesses, you look at the strengths, and then the consultant will come up with a recommendation on which entity should be designated as a Super ESCO. So once you have all this in a report, the most important next step is for the government to say, okay, based on the studies, based on the recommendation, I have designated this entity to be to play the role of the Super ESCO. So that's what we don't see. And then when we get to that point, you see some governments start dragging their feet, and they are not, deciding. So when you don't know what entity will play the role of a Super ESCO, you cannot deploy. You cannot implement the ASA program there, because for the ASA program, you need to provide the specific targeted TA to a specific entity that is playing the role of a Super ESCO. So if there is no entity, there cannot be a TA running in this case. So that's primarily the main situation that bring this initiative to a standstill. So if we are in that sort of situation in a country, I don't think there is nothing we can do, because we also want to see some ownership from the government, and it has to be, it has to come from that sort of a move. And if there is no move or that such, no such move, there can be nothing. But anyway, when we engage with countries, we engage a lot, but we sure that when we select a country, we don't get to that situation. The case of Côte d'Ivoire, they are not working on this. What I mentioned is that they are considering the development of a Super ESCO, and then the study was implemented, was done, the feasibility study to see if this should be a private-led Super ESCO or if this should be a public Super ESCO. So all the recommendations are there, but this study was not done under IASAP. It was done under another under the Energy Efficiency Market Development Program, a TA program that the bank is running to. So once, we have reached that point, but then we are waiting for governments to, once you read that trend, to take it to the next level.
Yes, well, thank you. And I think we can all understand that you cannot have a public sector focused Super ESCO program without buy-in and commitment. So that is very understandable. So yeah. We don't have much time left, but I still would like to touch upon the other topic that I mentioned, which is certification. So there are several questions related to certification, everything from how do you select who can receive training and certification, what sort of approach will be taken, and if there will be regional certificates, and also what sort of standards will be used, and a specific question if you will make something new or if you would utilize existing international standards. So a lot of questions in one, but basically if there are some criteria for selection of the entities that will receive training and certification, and approach and standards used.
Yeah, no, actually, this is it's a loaded question. I will try to just pick on some of the points. I hope I will not forget any. So regarding the certification, the last aspect, the last point of the question, there is no need for us, in Africa here to say that we're starting this certification scheme from scratch. It's always best to sort of build on existing international best practices, or if there are best practices that also exist regionally, I think it's always best to sort of build on these best practices, existing best practices, to sort of reduce or to optimize the cost of development of this scheme. So in terms of what will be the criteria and so on, but anyway, the other point maybe that I need to mention it too, as I said, is that what the bank is doing is just to provide the resources that are needed. It's a TA, so it's just to provide resources to these to the regional entities, the regional centers for renewable energy and energy efficiency. So because these regional entities already have in their plans, in their strategy, to harmonize, to have that sort of scheme, to certify ESCOs and also energy efficiency, individual energy efficiency professionals, because they understand it is very important to sort of address the barrier of lack of confidence of end users in the capacities or the qualification of the ESCO. So once this addressed, it will really support the development of the ESCO market, because one of the points that is sort of hindering the development is that lack of confidence. So for the regional centers, it will be, the regional centers will be the owners of the results. The bank is just providing them with the technical assistance. And this is through using the resources to, let's say, recruit an international or a consortium of firms that will sort of provide the technical, that will implement or carry out these technical activities. So the consultants or the firm will, there will be a definition of all the criteria to select, how to select those who will participate in the training. What are the entities? The firm, the consortium will also look at all, map on the institutional front, analyze all the possible entities that can really be involved in the implementation or running of the certification scheme at the regional level. So all these things will be done in a technical manner, basing on best practices and based on clear criteria that have been validated, accepted by the main beneficiaries the main stakeholders in each region. So all these criteria will be defined and validated and accepted, and then used in the during the TA to recruit those who will participate in the program in terms of training.
Thank you very much, Luke. I think that's provided some quite clear answer to the questions. There are even more questions, but looking at the time, I think we will have to end there, unfortunately. In case there are some really pressing questions you feel you didn't get the answer to, that you would still like to get an answer to, you're always welcome to reach out, and we'll do our best to either forward the answer or answer directly. But for this time, I would say thank you very much to our listeners. And most of all, thank you to you, Luke. Thanks for the interesting presentation and the follow-up responses to the questions and answers. And I think that's it. Stay tuned for upcoming webinars. We will have a webinar on a red screen and the use of red screen for ESCOs. And we will also have a webinar on enabling environments for ESCOs in developing countries, and what developing countries can do to facilitate the process of developing an ESCO market. These upcoming webinars are scheduled for late November, start December, but the exact dates will be communicated shortly. Thank you again, once again, Luke, and thanks for the meeting we had in Nairobi, and hopefully we can continue the discussions together.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good evening, morning, afternoon, whatever you are.